Now for an interview with trained lawyer and the co-founder of Charity Drive Zimbabwe, Sharon Matongo. Through her role, she is driven to increase the quality of education within rural schools through building refurbishment and the procurement of learning resources. She was selected as a Kofi Annan changemaker as a result of her work, and in 2022 addressed delegates at the first ever World Youth Assembly held in Geneva. Please give a warm welcome to the incredible Sharon Matongo. Hi, Sharon.
Hi V, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, a fellow Zimbabwean. I'm very proud. Could you please tell us about your journey and the organization that you co-founded, Charity Drive Zimbabwe?
Right, thank you for having me. So my name is Sharon Matongo, and I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit called Charity Drive Zimbabwe, and our goal is to increase quality education in rural communities. The way this nonprofit started wasn't really planned. I actually started off as a human rights teacher. I was trying to teach human rights at an orphanage when I was in Namibia. When after one of the human rights sessions, an orphan came to me and he had like worn his school blazer. And he was like, "Hi, sister, can you buy me a new blazer?" And I was so confused because I thought, my goal here is to teach you human rights. I don't know why you are coming to me and asking me about buying you a school blazer. But, after some reflection and introspection, I realized that the human rights education initiative I had started there wasn't really solving the right problems, and that there were deeper challenges that these kids were facing. And one of those challenges was access to quality education. Like, all he wanted to be able to do was to go to school and feel comfortable, to go to school and feel dignified in the education he was receiving, feel comfortable in his uniform. So a couple of months later, I found myself co-founding Charity Drive Zimbabwe with two of my friends, Puai Chuti and Simbarashe Ruanika, and we banded together to try and address some of the real challenges that kids are facing in rural schools. And our goal is to try and increase quality education for them. One of the main reasons why we believe this needs to be done is because we see education as a conduit for poverty eradication. We think that by addressing and investing in quality education in rural schools, we will witness like an upward trend in economic growth and economic development in these communities. So that's really the main thing that we're trying to do. And one of the main projects that I'm really proud of is a Building Kairos project that we carried out last year. And we had identified a small rural school in a place called Goromonzi. You might know it. And in that community, it was just a bunch of farm schools, a bunch of rural schools, and they basically had very few resources to assist them. They didn't have access to the updated textbooks, which meant they were learning outdated material. Why couldn't they buy updated textbooks? That was because they didn't have enough money to buy them. Why didn't they have enough money to buy them? That was because, the tuition fees and the school fees that the parents are paying either comes really late, or the parents just don't have enough money because they're coming from low income households. So we tried to address that barrier to education, which was a lack of school resources. The same thing, they didn't have electricity. So we installed electricity at the school, and a lot of the kids were also sitting on the floor when they were learning, which not only is that uncomfortable, but I think on a more personal level, I think it's not dignified for kids to be learning in such an environment. So we tried to address that by purchasing school materials and school furniture for the school. And the Kofi Annan Foundation really helped us in being able to do that through a seed grant and support that they provided. So that's what we're doing with rural schools in Zimbabwe.
That is amazing. And yes, I do know Goromonzi. I spent a lot of time there when I'm in Zimbabwe. So hearing that you've been identifying schools in that area and the work that you're doing there is amazing. And that leads me nicely on to wanting to know, as well as the amazing work that you're doing, what are the challenges that the global community are facing around education, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think there are so many challenges that we can talk about. Unfortunately, hopefully we can get to a day when, we have to literally think about the challenges. But I think some of the issues that we are facing, or the global community is facing, is number one, we have a lot of gender discrimination. So we do find that young girls and women find it really difficult to get into school. It could be for cultural reasons or traditional reasons, but they really don't have the access to education that, for example, their male counterparts have. We find, I think earlier you had a conversation with Ola and the panel that you were talking to, and she was talking about conflict. I think communities and areas that are really like conflict ridden and are war torn, kids over there find it really difficult to get into school or to even receive a quality education. I think climate change is another really big one linked to food security as well. You find that, through the work that I've been doing, we've realized that a lot of kids can't concentrate in class because they're hungry. That's as simple as it is. And that's a nutrition thing. So because of climate change, it's a lot harder for food security to become a thing that's attainable for these communities. So that's another big challenge that they're facing. But I think the root one that, I'm most passionate about and the root one that I think we're all really trying to fight against is the challenge of poverty, and it really exacerbates these education inequalities that make the gap between the really privileged communities and the less privileged communities. It makes that gap a lot wider. So kids can't afford to go to school. Their parents can't afford to take them to school. You find a lot of children working on the farms, like in the rural communities that I was talking about. And I'm sure you can find this in many other global South communities across the world. Kids have to choose between finding a meal to eat or going to school for a day. And it's like sometimes you'll find kids begging for money on the streets or getting engaged in labor or farm labor because they're trying to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis, and school is kind of the last thing that they're thinking about. So I think poverty is a really, really big one. And I think also that's why, quality education as an SDG becomes really important for us to try and promote and advance, because then we can really, face the challenge of poverty and the way it exacerbates education inequalities.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct about the intersectionality of all the different issues that people are facing around education. And you just touched there about the importance of SDG for quality education. Could you tell me just a little bit more about that and why you think it's such a critical goal for us to focus on?
Right. I think before we can even get into talking about SDG 4 as a particular goal, we have to try and figure out and situate the goal itself in the wider scheme of SDG goals in general. Like, why do we have SDG goals to begin with? And, for those that might not know, SDG stands for Sustainable Development Goals. And as a global initiative, we're all trying to invest in a world that's more sustainably developed. And SDG 4, quality education, gives us one of the opportunities to be able to address global inequalities. And I think quality education works as a really incredible and powerful tool to address the global inequalities that we face right now. So, you do see that a lot of people in less privileged communities and more disenfranchised, marginalized communities don't progress as much economically and socioeconomically. And sometimes that's really because they just don't have the education that they need. With education, they get to go to school, gain the skills that they need, and get a job. But beyond education being sort of this pedagogy that helps people get jobs, there's so much more in quality education that we don't often talk about. And that's sort of the dispositions that you get as you learn, the thinking frameworks that you learn, the curiosity and ideation skills that you learn as you're in school. We find that there could be a kid right now in New York or in Paris or in Lagos or in Johannesburg who was privileged enough to learn how to code or learn how to solve problems with their own critical thinking. And they become more inventive in the way that they address life. They become more solution oriented, and they already become, a lot more involved, and they participate in the marketplace of humanity. And then, on the inverse, you find kids who are in more war-torn communities, more poor communities, who don't even know what a computer is, who don't even know what electricity is, who don't get to really participate in this marketplace of humanity because they don't have the skills, and education really can give them that. So I think we can leverage quality education as the real conduit to wider sustainable development. And it really does affect other SDG goals, such as zero poverty and zero hunger and gender equality. So the more we can educate our kids, the more we can educate ourselves. It's always, a lifelong thing. The more we can see development taking place across the world and that inequality gap being lessened year by year. I think it's quite a big feat, but I think from the conversations that I've heard, the Education Live panels talk about, I think we do have what it takes to do that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. And I'd like to ask you in our final minute if you could just tell people how they can access your materials and support your organization, because what you're doing at Charity Drive to Zimbabwe is amazing. And I think a lot of people should get behind it more. So how can they find you?
Sure. So you can find all of our work at Charity Drive ZW on all our social media pages. And you can help us if you are in the area of climate resilient agriculture. We're trying to use that as a tool to help rural schools. If you're in the field of rural education and sustainable development, feel free to reach out and feel free to donate to us as well. So you can reach out to us at Charity Drive ZW on all our social media platforms, at charitydrivezw@gmail.com, to email us as well. Thank you.
Oh, that is wonderful. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Sharon. And I'm sure a lot of people will go and check you out and support you, as I will be doing from now on. So thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you for being with us.